Ladies and gentlemen, if you could take your seats, please. It's 2 o'clock and we'll start the meeting. Welcome to today's meeting of the Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I would like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live via the County Council's website and will also be available for viewing after the meeting. Can I ask you all to ensure that mobile phones are switched to silent? Can you please switch your microphone on when speaking, then turn it off when you have finished? I have received apologies from Mr. Sheehan, and Dr. Einan is substituting for him. Thank you. We move to agenda item 1, the minutes of the meeting held on the 4th of June. I propose that the minutes of the meeting held on the 4th of June are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Is everyone in agreement?
Yes,
thank you. Item 2, question time. No questions have been received. Item 3, questions asked by members under Standing Order 7.3 and 7.5. I've received no questions from members. I have received no items, urgent items that should be taken into account. Item 5, declarations of interest. Does any member have any interest that they wish to declare? No? Thank you. There are no declarations of the party whip. Do any other have any declarations of the party whip? No? Thank you. There are no petitions. So we now move to item 8, the first item of today's agenda, the annual report of the local Safeguarding Children Board, and I ask Mr. James Fox, the Safeguarding Board Business Manager, to present the report on behalf of the Independent Chair. Thank you very much, Mr. Fox, and welcome.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, apologies that Simon Westwood, the Independent Chair of the Safeguarding Children's Board, couldn't attend today to present this. Presenting the annual report of the Leicestershire and Rutland Local Safeguarding Children's Board. This will be the final annual report of the Safeguarding Children's Board, as it will cease at the end of September to be replaced by the new Leicestershire and Rutland Safeguarding Children's Partnership in line with the Children and Social Work Act 2017 and Statutory Guidance Working Together 2018, and I'm aware this committee has seen some information around those arrangements previously. This is a report required by law for the Safeguarding Children's Board to produce. It assesses safeguarding children, partnership work to safeguard children in the 2 areas of Leicestershire and Rutland that the board covers. And I'll draw the committee's attention to the key messages from the report outlined at point 11 in the covering report, which are summarised from the annual report in full. And those key messages contain a mixture of positive things, areas of positive developments around safeguarding children. So we've identified that workers and agencies are working well together to safeguard children in Leicestershire. And also there's been a significant improvement, or we've seen a significant increase in young people's voice influencing the work of the Safeguarding Children's Board as a whole, but also agencies hearing and responding to the voice and to the lived experience of children and young people in the safeguarding work and the broader work that they're undertaking. It also identifies that there are some areas for further work and further consideration that will be taken forward by the new Safeguarding Children Partnership. So there's some further improvement work around consistency in partnership approaches, around assessment and recording and management oversight, further work around understanding thresholds across the partnership, so across partners, particularly understanding the thresholds for access to services for safeguarding children. and further work to consider the impact of changes in service as well. These will be taken forward by the Safeguarding Children Partnership in the coming years. And at that, Chair, I'd like to leave it open to any questions from the committee.
Mrs. Page?
Thank you. Hiya, James. Could you elaborate, just before we go any further, a little bit more of what we know about the new partnership arrangements? You know, memberships, you know, how are people involved, fundings, will we get flowcharts, will we get a report? Will there be an annual report on the same basis? So just talk me through so I know what I've got to look forward to before we start. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I will do the intention for the operational arrangements of the partnership are to change as little as possible with the current board arrangements, to do as much as we can of what's working well, to build on what's been working well with the partnership working through the Safeguarding Children's Board. I guess the most significant change is the responsibility transfers from the Safeguarding Children Board to an equal and joint responsibility for the safeguarding partners for an area, which are the local authority, county council, the clinical commissioning groups and the police as well. So that's, I guess, a significant legal change. At the moment that the final details are being ironed out, the outline of the arrangements was published back in June, and that is available on the current board website. If you, which is www.lrsb.org.uk, to be able to find those. It's looking to build on what we do already, trying to streamline, to reduce reporting, reduce duplication in partnership arrangements. So certainly the membership of the partnership will continue to incorporate key public services, links with the voluntary community sector, education is an area we particularly want to develop further links with as well.
May I just come back, Chair? Thank you. So in a nutshell, virtually everything stays the same, except there will be a shared responsibility, which is good. But how can you see it being any conflict there? Is that a benefit? You know, just how do you feel? How is that going to pan out if you have three major bodies with shared responsibility?
Thank you, Chair. Members will recall that we presented a paper at the last meeting that set out the arrangements, and we can recirculate the overview of the structure if that will be useful, because just to remind ourselves what we've agreed and indeed what we've published. In relation to the shared responsibility, partners already have a shared responsibility for safeguarding. What this does is it sets out in legislation that those core partners that James has outlined have a fair and equal share around safeguarding. So the new partnership arrangements are building on what we do well already in terms of working in partnership, but built into the published arrangements are mechanisms whereby should disagreements happen or we're not able to agree, there are processes in place that will enable us to do that. The other area that we have agreed to continue to do within the new arrangements is to have an independent advisor, and the role of that advisor is to provide independent advice, to provide scrutiny of what we do, and also that person will be chairing that partnership as well. So we're confident that not only will the new arrangements continue to enable us to ensure children are safeguarded, but the partners will have an equal share in the responsibility for that safeguarding as well.
Dr. Einan.
Yeah. Well, thank you for this report, which is most interesting. I am new to this committee, being a visitor for Councillor Sheehan. So I'm interested in how we're moving to greater shared responsibility, and I can see the value of that. And looking on page 40, there does seem to be a concern that referrals to agencies who provide specialist support for substance misuse and etc. What public health might call the toxic triad. There's a concern about that, and I can see how working more closely with the CCG might benefit that. But there's two other areas where I think are more kind of strategic partnership way of working seems to be an issue. One is I remain concerned, and I know this has come up in other settings, other committees, about the rise in elective home education, where I think some of this is because difficult children are, their parents are finding navigating mainstream education too difficult, and therefore they're becoming vulnerable. So that's one thing that worries me. And then the other thing that concerns me is those children who are in the county and they're kind of not ours, and the risks of those, and how can we make sure that the new partnership going forward tackles that better than perhaps we've tackled it before? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll pick up the first issue around elective home education, and Sharon will pick up the issue around the work with children out of county. So you're right, there is an increase in the number of children who are being electively home educated. There's a raft of reasons why that number would go up. One of the reasons is that we are now better at collecting information about those young people. Not only have we changed the way in which we record it within the local authority, but we are able to get that information more readily. So some of it is about better recording. A lot of it is around parents making a decision or choice or move as a result of the feeling that schools aren't able to meet their children's needs. And again, sometimes that's the right decision and that's good for the child and it's an informed decision, and sometimes it may be based on the feeling that the school isn't doing what they need to do, and that's where we would be concerned. So part of our extra monitoring around elective home education is meaning that we're able to certainly monitor those children far more closely, but also work with schools and parents about how we can best meet those children's needs. So we share your concern around the increase in those numbers, and I guess the reassurance we can give is our more robust monitoring, the work our inclusion team are now doing with schools to work with those children as well. But it remains something of key interest or profile for us as well.
Yeah, I'll take it. In relation to the children that are living in Leicestershire that aren't the responsibility of Leicestershire County Council, they are children that are looked after by other authorities. So the responsibility for their looked after status remains with the placing authority. We do need to remind ourselves, though, that any safeguarding issues that are around for those children while they're living in Leicestershire, we do have a responsibility around safeguarding, not always to perform those tasks around safeguarding, but to ensure that they are performed appropriately by the authority who is responsible for them. So we do have to keep a very clear eye on that they are children while they're in Leicestershire that we do have to have information on, and we do have some level of responsibility. And also to remind ourselves that while living in Leicestershire, they are the responsibility of health authorities, education, schools, etc. within the authority. So they are perhaps the group of children that can give us most challenges, really, because we do have a level of responsibility. And as we know, Leicestershire have a larger number of private residential children's units. So we do therefore have a number of children that are being placed here by other authorities. We have and continue to work really closely with our partner agencies to make sure, one, we're aware of those children when they're placed, two, we're aware of the potential issues and challenges that those young people may be experiencing, and thirdly, to make sure that we have a joined up approach that will support those young people. The new arrangements will only enhance that partnership working. So a lot of that partnership working at the moment takes place with the police. A large number of the youngsters placed here, not in the entirety, but a large number are those youngsters that may be here because of vulnerabilities about going missing, linked into CSC, linked into child criminal exploitation, not in the entirety, but there are a number. and they are, when we look at our figures around children missing and missing return interviews, they can be a large number of those children that we work with. So we very positively see that the new safeguarding partnership arrangements will enhance our working with colleagues in the police and health, who work very closely with us now, but what these arrangements do for safeguarding still makes it everybody's business, but actually rather than the key responsible agency being the local authority on their own, this is putting very clearly with the police and health, with CCG, that they have just as much responsibility. So we think that these arrangements will strengthen those.
Chair here, and I guess just to, what Simon would say is here is those areas have been identified in the annual report, been identified by the current board, and would be areas that the independent scrutiny of the partnership would be looking to pick up, because we identify them as key areas to continue considering how we are working and how we can improve that.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Page, you wanted to come back?
Yes, please. There are more points. A very short one. Can you update me on the new learning management system, which is going to source, purpose, etc. Give me a bit more detail. And the other thing it is, I was very sad to read that schools were only represented at 2 meetings. Now, to me, this is really important that they should be part of this, where things are being picked up. And also, a few RVCSs, agencies, were engaged. But however, it says encouragingly, work is underway to ensure sustainable engagement in the new partnership. How can we make schools and volunteer, and how can we impart on them how important it is, and linking it back to the training. Will they get training to pick up problems? So just talk me around it, because I think that's a basis, and I think to me that's very important. So just give me some idea. Thank you.
Mrs. Page, if I may, what page were you looking at? I see a lot of paper.
I'm on page 37 for the academies and the VCS, and the learning management is on big 45. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, the learning management system is a system that's being looked at based within Leicester City Council, who host the training function for this Safeguarding Children's Board and the Leicester City Safeguarding Children's Board, and for the new partnerships, the training function that they host that. That's still underway. It's essentially something to help us kind of get the message out there about training, book people on training, and support evaluation of training. So it's something that's being developed there. It will be something that people can book onto online. Obviously, we're looking at a system that is accessible across the partnership and that people can use. That's a key area of how that's going to work there. In terms of the schools and the voluntary and community sector, again, in the document around the new partnership arrangements, they're identified as 2 key areas that we really do need to increase our engagement with those. So we're looking to start some discussions with schools about the best way to do that across the diversity of the school provision that there is in Leicestershire and in Rutland as well for the partnership that covers the 2 areas. So that's a discussion that's happening around how we can best get that consistent feed in and ensure that the messages of the partnership are getting out to schools, and they're getting assurance from schools around how they're working to safeguard children. With regard to the voluntary and community sector, again, we're looking to see how we can develop the reach again across a very diverse, and I think that's the nature of the issue with both those sectors, is the diversity of the sector, a large number of organisations and very different organisations in some cases, particularly in the voluntary and community sector, and looking away, having that discussion with them to identify the best way to support that. We currently have a voluntary and community sector reference group that's referenced there, and we'll be looking to work with the agencies that are part of that to see how we can increase the breadth of the involvement from voluntary and community sector agencies across the area in the new partnership arrangements.
Dr. Inan, you wanted to come back?
Looking at the point on page 19, point 17, about funding reductions, and it says that the budget going forward no longer includes funding for serious case reviews. Now, clearly the independent chair values serious case reviews, as he mentions them in his forward as one of the ways that we come to our conclusions about how successful the service is. Could you explain to me how we will ensure that serious case reviews are taken seriously?
Yes, certainly. So the safeguarding boards have sufficient reserves, as it outlines, to cover the costs of our current serious case reviews. In the new arrangement, serious case reviews are replaced with a slightly different arrangement, child safeguarding practice reviews. There is different approaches to reviews and learning. You've got a very fixed approach for serious case reviews that can take a lot of resource and a long time. I think one of the ways we're looking to work differently in the partnership is identify other ways of getting information from learning from cases in a more timely manner. We can have case reviews that can take quite a long time in a timely manner, and use different approaches to get input from practitioners, from families, from workers in a different way. The budget for the partnership, including what we feel we might need for practice reviews, will be determined by the safeguarding partners, and that's part of, we've got our budget for this year, it's something they'll be working on in the coming months for the coming years. So I don't know if...
I think just to add to that and hopefully reassure, decisions about cases that may lead to either under the new under the old arrangements, a serious case review or a learning review, as James has outlined, go to a panel where the details of that case are discussed. So, and it's always about how best can we learn from anything that's occurred to make sure that we learn for that particular child who was subject to that incident, but also going forward our learning and our practice to improve practice across the partnership. So this is a really rigorous process that will continue in the new arrangement. So not one person makes a decision about what goes to a review or not, and not one agency would have the ruling factor, if you like, in saying whether something's looked into. So just to reassure that there is and there will still be in the new arrangements a real rigour around how we look at those cases and how we ensure the learning from those incidents are disseminated across the partnership.
Mr. Auld?
Thank you, Chair. I think committee might be interested to know that the Director and Assistant Director and myself and Cabinet Support Member are always discussing at our weekly meetings where it's appropriate serious case issues. Before it ever gets to the formal stage where a report is put together, we've gone through the background, we've gone through the context, and I hope that members would find that reassuring that you've got the one level, which is the formal report, but you've got a much wider base to that formal report, which is when we're all meeting and monitoring on a regular basis.
Thank you very much. If there are no more questions or comments, we are asked to give our views, and I think we've done that. And any comments, there's none being proposed, but I'd like to thank Mr. Fox for coming along to present to us. Thank you very much indeed. You're welcome to stay, but I'm sure you've got other things to do as well. We now move on to the next item, which is on page 49, and it's the report on the early years by the Director of the Children and Families. And I'm also asking Alison Bradley, welcome to join us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'd like to share this report with you. This is an overview of the work taking place across the county by the Early Years Inclusion and Childcare Services. The work is set against the legislation from the Childcare Services and Childcare Act 2016. think it's important to draw your attention to the background around this, that the vision set out for Children and Families Department is that the Leicestershire is the best place for children and young people and their families. And a key priority is that every child gets the best start in life, and the department is committed to providing the best support for children for their health, development, learning and the best they can be. As part of the education, inclusion and quality areas within my service area, the Education Inclusion Childcare Service was restructured to allow for all the appropriate teams and services to be in one service. It's also important to note that the education of the early years is not just about the early years children, it is about the local authority's duty to secure sufficient high quality childcare provision. That's for 0 to 14 and 18 years in the SEND arena. The Early Years Inclusion Childcare Service delivers commissioned support to those judged to be less than good by Ofsted, and provides advice and guidance to all providers in the county. Note that currently Leicestershire 95% of all childcare providers are rated Ofsted good or outstanding. In Leicestershire, the market is dominated by the private, voluntary and independent providers. This means that the role of the Early Years Childcare and Inclusion Service is critical in positively influencing and shaping the market providers and the outcomes for our preschool children. Our service monitors the provision on a monthly basis and allows us to be aware when there's sufficient gaps in childcare places become evident, and this alerts those gaps across the county. As part of the monitoring process for quality or sustainability is taken into account, and these different types of provision and diversity allowed. You see that the table in point 10 does note that there have been cases opened and cases closed. We are fortunate that we've only had one daycare provision that has closed, but we have had some sufficiency issues in the rural areas where sustainability issues and low numbers of children attending the provision has had an impact. The introduction of the new Ofsted framework could have impact on the quality of the provision as the providers come to terms with the new framework. That is what the implications are, and in particular it's not just on the leaders and management, it is across the workforce, and that could be quite a challenge for some of our smaller PVI, private and voluntary independent providers. One of the other service areas that we have is the FEED, the Free Education Entitlement for children, and the local authority through the childcare, early years childcare, has to ensure that there is responsibility to administer the take-up of the fee for 2-year-olds. And in Leicestershire, you'll note that 72% of eligible children are funded through this, which is above the national average of 68%. The take-up of free early education available to all 3 and 4-year-olds is 98%, which is also good. The Childcare Act 2016 also introduced the requirement to provide free childcare for eligible working parents of 3 and 4-year-olds. This essentially doubled the universal entitlement. The 15-hour entitlement for most disadvantaged 2-year-olds remains the same. The new policy envisaged is having a significant positive impact on families and helping to give the best start in life for children. In particular, the uptake of the 2-year-olds who are in receipt of free childcare who turned 3 and went on to take 30 hours. So that's 23% of our 2-year-olds did that, which in turn has given parents the opportunity to take up work. It is also of note that the early years childcare funding comes through the DSG, the Dedicated Schools Grant, and the funding is based on the January census data completed by providers immediately preceding the financial year and adjusted for the following year. And we are one of the 48 authorities receiving the lowest funding per pupil for free education entitlement. As the sector faces significant financial pressures because of pensions and contributions, minimum wage impact on small businesses, the free early education entitlement has has not been reviewed since 2017, and the introduction of the extended entitlement has made some providers unsustainable, but it wasn't worse than we'd actually predicted, and we, through our systems, monitor that. The early years workforce development, we have 59% of 2, 3 and 4-year-olds who are supported by graduate practitioners, which compares to 52% nationally. So again, that's another credit to the service area that we have supporting that. But the introduction of the extended entitlement has made it difficult for some of our smaller providers to access training due to the backfilling, the higher ratios, etc. In order to address that, the Early Years Childcare and Inclusion Service does respond to that by providing a more flexible approach to professional development through e-learning and through other opportunities, through training plans that are streamlined to prioritise the needs of practitioners so that they can be released to do that. In 2017, the government released the report entitled Unlocking Talent and Fulfilling Potential. A lot of work has taken place in the early years and childcare sector in order to do that, and we have been highlighted as one of the 53 authorities to receive training and support to provide for early years professional development. We work with the educational psychologists to actually support the workforce within the early years offers through the emotional literacy and support assistant programme for the early years. School readiness is a priority, and it's part of the department's plan and priority of ensuring that young children get the best start in life. And the service is instrumental in developing the shared school readiness definition across a range of partners, including health, social care, and the leaflets have been developed for parents, giving them practical ideas and getting them ready for school. We're fortunate that the leaflets were distributed through Leicestershire Partnership Trust to all parents who were due to start school in September 2019. And we've used lessons learned. The services contributed towards the development of the 1001 Critical Days leaflet, which was used with parents and partners to shape key messages. And that's important about encouraging parents and families to play a huge value on the talking, playing, cuddling, relaxing, and all the activities that we'd expect of families with their children. There's been conferences held as well, and the pathway for further support for young children and health in early years through the Early Years Inclusion Childcare and Children's Families Wellbeing Service is being developed for those who are at risk through the 2-year development check. We've had lots of work happening through our SEND area of the early years and childcare. It's quite a long word to say, I know, but the early years and childcare offer, where we've got a graduated response. So the graduated response for our offer is that we've got a daily duty desk for the guidance for practitioners, and providers can access drop-in surgeries where a range of professionals are available to give advice. We do have inclusion funding, but there's a huge demand on the inclusion funding, so there's consultation taking place to make sure that we have the inclusion funding being used in the right way. In addition to that, we have 5 practitioners that have been appointed, and they are there to work with young children who are presenting with early signs of social communication needs or social, emotional, mental health needs, so that we can work directly with those children. And you'll note that point 32 notes that we've had 10 children who've had that intensive support and who are now into education rather than being out of education, and that is being excluded before they've even hit the statutory school age on there. The outcomes for children, just before I go on to that, to develop that further, we also have had the SEND conference for professionals that was held in November, and we have a following event being held this November with the focus on social communication. So those conferences are around SEND are having high take-up and positive feedback. The outcomes for our young children are that at foundation stage we have the early years foundation stage profile, and that is used to inform parents that their children are meeting their goals, etc. We get a smooth transition into the key stages, and it helps our teachers in the statutory sector to plan effective, responsive and appropriate curriculum to meet their needs. We have a free school meal entitlement, and the children who are in receipt of free school meals do underachieve compared to their peers. With 593 children who've been identified in Leicestershire as being in receipt of free school meals, and 44.8% of these gain good level of development. What we do note is that there's children who are not entitled to free school meals, and the pupil premium that it attracts are actually accessing their entitlement. So we have been doing work to target those, and there was an increase from 100 from the previous year due to the targeted piece of work that providers have been doing within their settings to enable the parents to access the entitlement for free school pupil premium when they're into the school sector. In conclusion, children's outcomes in their early years continue to improve by the end of the foundation stage, and that isn't just because of the work that is done in the statutory sector, it is through the joined up work that we are doing in the early years and inclusion childcare offer. And children continue to access provision in Leicestershire that is enhanced by the high percentage of good and outstanding providers mentioned at the beginning. We've got excellent relationships with partners in the sector, and local providers have demonstrated considerable willingness to be flexible in responding to the significant challenges that can be provided. Leicestershire has a growing range of models, including opportunities for developing blended offers for parents where they can't always access their 30 hours, and proactive tailored communication for external partners have successfully promoted school readiness materials. And the final point there, that by aligning all the 0 to 5 services in one place, which was apparent last year, the service is in a better position to support the sector in early identification of children emerging with additional needs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kaufman?
Thank you, Chair. Can I take you back to paragraphs 16, 17, early years funding? I've been reading in the papers the difficulties relating this, and I haven't quite understood what the problem is. What does it really mean? How is it affecting local young children, these financial pressures? Are they having less input? But please explain.
Well, basically, the providers have are mostly funded through, if they're taking up their fee to do that, as in the free education entitlement on there. The providers are finding it really hard with all the on-costs that are going on. It's much like the school funding, really, if we replicate that back down into the PVI, the private and voluntary sector. So they are having to do the same amount but on a less, because of the staff on costs, etc., in order to be able to do that. And if they don't put the fee into place in the provision, they're not attracting the parents that want to come that way. So it's really hard for them to actually balance their budgets in order to be able to do that.
If I may, Chair. So are we saying that the people who are sending children to the providers who are not users are being asked to subsidise the children who are coming under this funding, under this scheme? Or are you saying that that they're refusing to accept children because it's not economically viable for them to take children under this scheme?
I think it may well be both. Just in essence, the amount of money that the government gives per hour for fee children in Leicestershire doesn't always cover the amount of cost per hour it costs for the sector to deliver. So that's the first issue. The money isn't, by fee paying people, isn't being used to subsidise this. One of the concerns that we've highlighted consistently when we've talked about the free education entitlement is our worry that providers won't be able to afford to deliver that free education entitlement. So I think your second point stands. What Alison's report in this report is we haven't seen significant elements of this, but what paragraph 16 and 17 are saying is that we're acknowledging within Leicestershire that our funding levels don't support the funding levels required for our early years sector.
Okay, that's interesting. Have we made representations? Yeah. Well, we're
When you say it's a very general question, have we made representations? The lobby group that I used to chair, F40, have made extensive representations. We will know tomorrow, I understand, when the detail comes from the current Chancellor of the Exchequer, how the government is going to enhance the DSG in the way that was outlined last week, but I haven't got the detail of that at this point in time.
Can I just add in as well, just for clarity, if you are taking in 2-year-olds, there's a different staffing ratio and implications there. So all the on-costs that I was trying to articulate was that that's replicated, so it does become a difficult decision for the provider and for parents looking to seek the best place for their children to go to as well.
Thank you very much. I found this very useful to my understanding of it. Thank you.
Mr. Welsh.
Thank you, Chair. On page 53, starting up at 26, there's a number of paragraphs talking about referrals made to the SEND service. It all reads very positive, so try and find the right words. Are you telling us that everything now is going swimmingly and smoothly, there are no obstructions, there's no hold-ups, and all is going well with as handling of SEND referrals?
I would like to say that we are have a much better understanding of this. We have our services lined up in a better way to respond to the demand. The fact that we identified a year ago that we had a large number of children waiting pre-statutory school age with SEND needs and not being able to respond, I'd like to think that we are in a better position. I wouldn't like to say that we have it all totally resolved, but we are aligned in a much better way to respond to that challenge.
I think I'm reading through the words. If I took my car into the garage, the mechanic looks at it and says that engine has blown up, but we're really aligned to understand the needs that you have, those words would be correct. But I'm trying to understand just a bit clearer, is there still a problem there still with the sheer numbers coming through the system?
There is still a problem with the numbers coming through the system, and we have put ourselves into a position of aligning, in particular where I've noted right at the beginning, where we did align the early years special needs teaching service to be part of the same service. So any differences that there would have been about communicating across that, we are picking up need earlier, so therefore we are able to respond to do that.
A very short last question. Right on section 1 of this, section 7, it talks about this covering ages 0 to 14 up to 18 for SEND. Your report, though, is talking about just the bottom end of that age range, isn't it? Can you just clarify which age range you're covering?
The very long and difficult title I have to say about the early years inclusion and childcare services. There are two statutory functions there. The early years inclusion of children in the 0 to 5, that's the SEND need that you may be referring to in terms of the SEND panel. But the childcare sufficiency is about the wraparound services that goes up to 18 for care of those in the wraparound services out of statutory school age. Does that clarify your point there?
Yeah. Thank you.
Mr. Orr, did you want to come back on this point, and then I'll move to Dr. Island. Thank you.
If I look at page 53, Jeff, in its entirety, 2015-16, 296 referrals, 2018-19, 536 referrals. In between that time, Chair, we've got the establishment of the Special Educational Needs Board, which I now attend, which is also attended by parents from the Leicestershire Parents Forum, who are not short in coming forward at their particular slot with any issues that are negatively affecting either their members or the children of their members. If you look at paragraph 32 in particular, you might say, what was the success rate with the 9 children who are not commented on because you're quite right, Jeff, what you've got there is an example of an outstanding outcome, in my view. To go from a 10-day fixed exclusion to be supported to increase their hours and then for the entire school period is a success story. None of us will accept that that is the same for every single child, but it is good when we're being critical to also recognise success. And for this particular child, the system has worked well. You've got a really honest report here. We can pick parts of it as we need, but since the SEND board has been set up, I think parents now have got a very formal way of making their views known through that, because they have a special slot in the agenda where they can raise any items that they wish to.
Thank you very much. Dr. Einan.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for this most interesting report. In the previous session, we were talking about elective homeschooling, and my experience of meeting with parents who elect to homeschool is it's a choice made because they often feel that their child, yes, is somewhat difficult, but the school is even more difficult and they're not getting their needs met. So I was very pleased to see paragraph 33, where what appears to be happening, and I'd like to hear more about this, is that the early years autism team is broadening its remit and supporting children who have not yet got a diagnosis, and certainly this has often been a real bugbear for parents, is that you're waiting for a diagnosis and the child is clearly not quite normal, but health haven't quite decided what label to land on them. So that's very interesting. And two questions. One is, how is that need going to be identified? And the other one is, do you think that this will then have an impact on elective homeschooling figures?
Okay, first point on there. Yes, we did review, part of the review that we had for the early years childcare service, bringing in line the 0 to 5 special needs teaching service. A component of that was staff who are skilled in working with children with autism. The diagnosis of autism doesn't come as prevalent in the 0 to 5 sector as it does post 5 and sort of moving through the age ranges, because a lot of needs are through developmental side of it. But the decision when we analysed trends and back data of the young people coming through the system was to look at those skill set that we had through the service moving in, was to look at a more responsive approach. In answer to your question, how will those young people be identified? That is through the assessment made through the setting that they're in, through conversations with the parents and the families to see whether the children are following a normal developmental curve in terms of their responses, social communication needs, and if they're not, then we would use the skill set of those staff to do that. We don't want that barrier to be there about having the label, the diagnosis that may come from health, so we're moving that into there. So in terms of working with those young children, it could be that we've got the special needs teaching service skill set being spread across a wider range of staff. And if a child does arrive in a setting with a label, then the staff are already lined up to work with them. So it isn't an exact science in saying this child looks like this and they may have autism, or they may end up with a diagnosis of autism. It's using that skill set more appropriately. So in terms of elective home education, it's difficult to tell whether that is, but what we have got is a vigilance in the system, because this at the early years childcare inclusion and childcare service does sit as part of my whole service remit, where I have got the inclusion service. So any children that are known to us that are through the PVIs, that are moving across the PVIs and they're not attending, we will have a vigilance so that my inclusion service can pick them up when they're coming up to statutory school age for electing to go down the elective home education route. So we are able to capture the data. So back to the response I had there, we are actually aligned in a much better way to be more agile and responsive, to make sure that we're not having children missing out on education or elective home education without good reason to be able to do that.
Mrs. Seaton.
Thank you, Chair. Throughout reading this, it's quite obvious the early years is working. the earlier you can get hold of a child and manage the problems and the difficulties in education, the easier it is for the child to manage later on in life. So the question I'm going to ask doesn't seem very fair because you are above the national average. So I do apologise for this. But you've got 72% of the eligible children on the fee for 2-year-olds. I'm sorry, top of page 51, number 13. So you've got, and I note that 96% of those 72% are in in a good or above average outstanding provision. But I'm still worried about that 28% that's not taking up. I just want to be clear on what barriers there are for that, whether it because they're in rural isolation, whether it's because it's not financially viable, there isn't a placement anywhere near them. So I'd just like to understand the barriers there are, and are those barriers recorded, and hopefully try to get over them. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, good question to note on there. We, for reassurance purposes, there is casework management oversight of cases, but also management oversight of all the areas that I've divided up into this report in here. So I can't with confidence say to you, oh yes, I know exactly what's happening with all of them, but we could bring that back to further discussion on there. But I would feel confident that the bits that I raise in at the beginning of the report about the can't find the bit now where I'm looking for it, about the sufficiency and the bit in there, that we would highlight our concerns through the appropriate channels if we thought that we've got a selection of providers who were not at good, and what we were doing about them and what that impact that has on the children and families that attend there. So I don't have a set way of being able to report to you at the moment, but I do have confidence that that service area do management oversight to make sure they're looking at that.
Thank you very much. Before we move on to the next item, I would just like to say how thorough this report has been and very honest, and I think that's what we always look for. And I would like, on behalf of the committee here, to thank all the hard work that's going into this, and we do appreciate it very much. It's all moving, as far as I can see, under difficult times, in the right direction. And I think, so I would just like to say that. Thank you very much. We'll now move on to agenda item 11, which is on page 63. And I will ask, find my crib sheet. This is item 10, are we on? Oh, have I moved ahead? Sorry, people. I'm very keen. Right. We're now moving on to recruitment and retention of social workers, and this will be welcome to Maura O'Hagan and Sharon to present this to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. If I introduce the report and hand over to Moira, who has led on a lot of areas of development for us around the recruitment and retention of social work staff. As the committee will hopefully recall, we've presented reports previously to the committee to outline both the national issues and challenges around the recruitment and retention of qualified, experienced social work staff. And I've previously presented our recruitment and retention strategy, which is now in the second year and is currently, we're reviewing what those next steps and next stages will be. It remains, although we've seen and were able to report to the last committee when we discussed this topic, an improving picture, we continue to achieve in this area but I think we acknowledge that, and as we've said before, this is an area that we can't afford to take our eye off, and is an area that we need to continue to continually develop and look at how we support, how we attract social work staff to Leicestershire, but also how we support those staff that are with us to make sure that their professional career remains with Leicestershire. We are seeing over time increasing challenges around the number of social work staff who are available. We are aware that of the national picture about how long a lot of social workers remain in frontline practice, and we are aware of some of the challenges around the ever-increasing complex situations that social workers are called on to deal with, and how we need to support staff. So I'm going to hand over to Moira, who will take you through some of the detail in the report, and then obviously come back for any questions.
As Sharon said, what I've tried to do in this report really is to make members aware of the national picture, so that you've got a broader context in which to understand what's happening in Leicestershire. It's fair to say that we have had an extremely challenging period, and are in competition, as you'd imagine, with our neighbouring authorities and indeed other local authorities, other local agencies rather. So the work on the dedicated strategy that we've developed has really gone very well. We have had an implementation plan which we've worked through steadily, and as I've outlined in the report, 20 out of 24 actions that we identified initially have been completed. It is hard to assess impact because it's hard to draw that straight line from A to B, but in the report I set out the measures that we're using to try and assess the impact of what we're doing, and you can see from that a steadily improving picture, and as Sharon said, you know, there are some fluctuations. Some of those fluctuations, those rises recently, have been as a result of some positive news, in the sense that we've had some additional posts built into the establishment. So overall, we think we're doing positively, but we can't, as Sharon said, we can't take our eye off the ball. This is a fluctuating situation. I don't know whether that's perhaps enough at the moment, and ask any questions.
Mr. Welsh.
Hi, Maura, thanks. I've got three questions. I'm sorry if one of them sounds... No, two questions. One sounds a bit picky. You talk of the 20 actions completed. I couldn't help but ask the question then, what are the four we've still got to do? And then secondly, it's to do with the numbers. You've talked of vacancies, and the whole time equivalence is 25, but in paragraph 22, we say that we've got 53 agency staff employed. Well, does that mean that we're employing staff over capacity, and just why? It must be expensive.
If I answer the issue of the agency numbers, and then Moira can talk about the areas that we've not, the four areas. In relation to agency staff, we have agency staff employed with us for several reasons. One is that they are covering a vacancy, so that's like-for-like vacancy. We've also got a number of agency staff who are with us who are part of our support to ASYE staff, so that's newly qualified social workers. So because in that first year in practice we offer an enhanced programme and support to them. Part of that includes that they have a more controlled and reduced number of children that they are working with. And in order for us to be able to sustain that and ensure that that doesn't impact on our services to children, we have to make sure how we cover that shortfall in capacity. And we do that by, for every so many ASYEs we do have an agency worker in place. We then have a number of staff on maternity leave, and we cover that because it wouldn't be right for that 12-month period for children not to have a worker. And we have a number of staff who are on more long-term sickness, and we make sure we cover those. In addition, where we've agreed additionality, because as part of our review of the service and growth in demand, we know that we don't currently on the structure have enough workers. We've agreed how we will increase those numbers, and when we go out, whilst we're going out to advert to recruit permanently, because we have identified a capacity issue and because we want to ensure that children have a worker straight away, we have actually recruited agency for those children. So yes, the figure shows an increasing number again, a higher number against the number of vacancies, but I hope that that mix actually demonstrates. What I would say is we are working very tightly. We have clear oversight of that. Myself, and I take that to our management team meeting that Jane chairs. So on a monthly basis, we have oversight of that and make sure that we are clear why we have agency staff, and we are working with those teams where we've got staff coming back to work or permanent staff taking up posts to reduce that dependency on agency.
Can I just say, Chair, in response to that bit, in light of that comprehensive answer, I'm really impressed at how few agency staff we're employing. Thank you, Sharon.
I think just to add to that, you did make a comment around the cost of it, and you're absolutely right. The cost of the use of agency is putting significant pressure on the department's budget, but we know it will remain a pressure going forward in light of what Sharon's highlighted. We have broken down in paragraph 15 how we're using agency, and we think it's really important to continue to do that so that you've got detail of just so that you've got detail of the overview that Sharon's given. We're really committed to making sure that we keep monitoring that. But the bottom line is it does put significant pressure on our budget. But if we don't make that decision, then we won't be able to manage our cases of young people. So it's the right decision to make for children.
Just to complete, giving you reassurance about the implementation plan, it's a 2-year plan, so we've done 1 year of it. The outstanding actions are continuing to progress. There's not really many left. The 4 that I referred to in the paper have now moved on. So one was an environmental study about where our social workers were working and the pressures on them and how that was feeling. That's now been completed. Another one was developing a programme of support to help managers and senior practitioners in the delivery of group supervision, which social workers report as being very supportive of them. That programme is underway. There was a commitment to provide some additional training around systemic issues. That's in hand, but there's a timing issue. And the final action is a review of the senior practitioner role, and that's being picked up as part of the transformation unit work as we look at capacity overall.
Chair, like so many things in scrutiny, often it's the answers, the little bits like that are the most revealing. And in fact, I go away very, very happy with the strategy in place.
Mr. Hall, did you want to come back before I move on to the other speakers?
Chair, on paragraph 9 through to the bullet point just before the end of paragraph 12, that's pages 58 to 59, we've got a title, Developing a Dedicated Strategy. Actually, I would put that in more simple terms and say that everything in the department at the moment is working to give workers job satisfaction. And if you look at the success of the Pride in Practice events that are being held in Melton that I've been to, and maybe we need to think about inviting the spokes to the next one so they could see it for themselves. What I've seen there has been a growth of pride from our workers, including agency workers. This paper doesn't tell you how many agency workers have actually come and joined us on a full-time basis. So to me, it's a really open, very honest paper. If I have a niggle with it, as my director knows, it's where you've got the figures, social worker, senior practitioner and team manager. I think it would have been more helpful if we'd known out of how many. So 15 social workers out of how many, 6.5 senior practitioners out of how many, and so on. But it is a really positive paper, and I can't overstate how pleased I am with the way that Jane, Sharon and everybody else is working really hard on this to bring about the changes that they're achieving.
Can I just say apologies for that oversight? The current establishment for all HCPC registered workers in the department is 259.
Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you, Chair. I would agree. This is a pleasure to read. We've got a long way, but this is a question, page 59. I like this, grow your own. And I think I know at least one person who's going through the system at the moment, and I think it's very successful, it's creative. But the question I'd like to ask is, bearing in mind that we're forced to pay lower salaries than some of our competitors for staff, when these people have completed their courses, do we have some agreement that they will stay with us for a period of time, or are we training social workers for other authorities that are in a position to pay more?
Shall I pick that one up? In terms of growing our own, we've got two current schemes which we've allowed us to expand our routes into social work. One is a partnership with Frontline, which is a fast-track programme. Last year, well, today, in fact, 3 of those participants who started last year have joined our workforce. Very high calibre. And we have a further 5 participants starting today who will start their year with us. We'll see what the retention rate is like, but the feedback from those participants is extremely positive. They are very positive about Leicestershire, so we're very optimistic about keeping those participants. That's not costing the department anything because that's part of a national scheme. Our Grow Your Own scheme is an apprenticeship scheme, a social workers apprenticeship scheme, and we started with 6 participants. They are already our own staff. They are workers within social care support staff and in early help. So they already have a very significant commitment to working in Leicestershire. They've got families here, they've got children in school, they've been working in our department for a long time. So again, we can't be sure, but we're fairly confident that because they've shown that commitment to us for working for some time, that they will remain with us post. Certainly our ASYE, our newly qualified programme, we have got very high retention rates.
Chair, I'm not quite sure whether I've got the answer I'm trying to...
Oh, sorry.
No, it's, I mean, the information was good. I just wondered
if we tie them in financially.
Yes.
No, we can't do that.
Okay.
Sorry
Thank you.
to be waffly when I needed to be.
Mr. Ord actually has referred to the question I was going to ask, which was regarding point 8. Therefore, I'll move on to something else. When you have staff leaving, do you have exit interviews? And if so, what are in terms of, if you're doing a bar chart, are the most common reasons stated for the fact that they're leaving? I appreciate that in number 6 you do make reference to the extreme stresses that the job brings because of the nature of the work. Is that borne out in the exit interviews?
The exit interviews are a mixture of themes. For some people it is about those pressures and those stresses. For some people, it's natural progression. They're looking for other opportunities. Sometimes it's personal reasons, travel. It's fair to say that we've not had the take-up of exit interviews that we would like. So in the next phase of the strategy, that'll be something that we're reviewing to see whether we either need to make that compulsory or, because at the moment it's a voluntary thing.
Often people are quite polite. Sometimes it can actually be that they're moving because they found a job that pays more, but they probably will use other language to avoid saying that.
People have been very straight with me. I mean, one of the advantages of me doing it is that I am not operationally responsible. So the people that are coming to see me know me less well. I've not line managed them. And so I've been very impressed with people's honesty. And as I say, it would be unfair for me to characterise it as, you know, in a biased way. There have been a range of reasons, but certainly pay. People have moved, particularly to, most recently to Coventry, who are paying, I think it was £8,000 more for a similar job. We can't compete with that. So there's very little persuading for me to do. But certainly that has not been a lone voice. Particularly for workers, I think, who are more mobile. So where they're single, they don't have family commitments and are more able to travel. That money is very attractive as they're seeking to get on the housing ladder, that extra money. Where people are more committed locally or have got other pressures, that movement is not always easy for them, for money.
And the final question, Chair.
Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. Correct me if I'm wrong, if I used the wrong word, but were the two words that you used at the beginning were extremely challenging? Oh, right, good. I haven't misquoted you then. Are you referring to the general data in here, or was there something else that you were referring to when you said the situation is extremely challenging?
I'm referring to the national research that's been done both by the professional bodies for social work, where they've looked over a period of time at the difficulties for social workers, the stresses, what keeps the British Association of Social Work has done a number of studies and research studies on what keeps people working for authorities. And the information has come from those studies and the professional body around this, that people are tending to stay in frontline practice. Most social workers are staying in frontline practice for about 6-7 years.
Mr. Auld.
Apologies, Chair. I omitted something when I spoke about job satisfaction. It's been the practice in the department now. It started with Paul, it's continued with Jane. Sharon has been the linchpin right the way through of doing what we call locality visits. That's when we're getting out and meeting the teams on a regular basis, listening to what they have to say, listening to what their concerns are. The committee should be really reassured by the paper, but I would hope I get full support from this committee when it comes down to the budget. I've got an overspend in asylum seekers approaching £700,000, but an overspend in the department approaching 2 million. That should reassure all of you that we don't stint. Where a child needs, we provide. And I take the political flak in the meetings that I have to go to when the officers are not always present. But for things like job satisfaction, Pride in Practice events, locality visits, and the report that you got today, which I think is first class, you ought to be really reassured. But in turn, I'm saying to you, when the budget comes up later this year, I would welcome any support you can give. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Auld. I'm sure everybody around this committee will do their utmost to support you in your budgetary discussions, shall we say. I think this is an excellent report. I think we should be very proud of what the team are achieving they're looking at every opportunity and using, thinking outside the box to do what we can. And it is a difficult situation, but I'd like again, on behalf of this committee, to thank you all very much indeed. It's and I know the people that I've met when I've been out meeting some of them, there's quite a good spirit out there. And I think what they also feel is that they can approach more senior management than they may be at to discuss any thoughts and problems they may be having at the time. So many congratulations and thank you very much indeed. We'll now move on to, I'm right now, aren't I? Item 11, having tried to get rid of item 10. So we're on to item 11, which is the Leicestershire's response to tackling child sexual exploitation. This is the 6-month update we've asked for, and this is being presented to us by Donna Smalley, the service manager. Thank you very much and welcome, Donna.
Thank you. I've been to Scrutiny before. You're very, very aware that we've been co-located, hosted by Leicestershire Police since September 2014. We continue to operate from South Wigston Hub. Sorry. In relation to the success of the CSE team within the hub, we've developed a further model in relation to a response to domestic abuse. So we also have social workers who are committed to work alongside Leicestershire Police, following the same model that we did with sexual exploitation. So a morning review of the last 24 hours of referrals that have come in directly to the police, so we can offer a specialist advice and service. In relation to developments, you're all aware that the Crime Police Commissioner offered us huge amount of support and resilience in the past. What remains with us now is the CSE police analyst who completes support to live investigations. But most important to us currently is the opportunity to map associations of children and young people, particularly cross-border, and to work across force to force in relation to activity of children's movements, particularly between the city and county. We've now appointed a CCE coordinator who is a detective inspector. I'm happy with the appointment. She worked alongside me in relation to our first response to CSE. So Helen Schofield is aware of partnership work and is extremely committed. So she is starting to develop LLR response in relation to an action plan to tackle CCE. We've also appointed a missing and safeguarding coordinator who is a Leicestershire County Council employed social worker who specialised in the CSE team. Part of his role, he sits within the Missing From Home police team within the hub, and he goes out to providers. As we talked previously about out of area children, how many children's homes we have across the county, he goes out with the police to talk to staff about strategies and coordinates the response from the placing authority in relation to notifications and how to risk manage the children, how we can assist while children are in our area. Leicestershire Police also offer very bespoke packages to send over to other forces if children are moved. There seems to be, particularly if we escalate through Sharon, notifications to other authorities about our concerns for young people, children seem to move fairly quickly to other authorities. that's Sharon's fault, not mine. In relation to data, we're seeing a continued rise for CSE and CCE referrals. That's very positive in relation to raising awareness across the partnership, health, education, police forces, probation, housing, licensing forums. We have a foot in the door, local JAGs, community safety meetings to share information, to share live case summaries about the expectation of what local communities can look for and assist in terms of spotting the signs and knowing the signs of any form of exploitation of children. We've been successful in relation to national referral mechanisms, safeguarding in terms of being first responders, and they are referrals that are made to a National Crime Agency in relation to the identification of children that have been part of modern slavery or have been trafficked. This is exceptionally important, particularly to victims when they receive that notification. It's the first indication that they are believed by police and enforcement that something has happened to them. Those NRMs have now been extended in terms of criminal exploitation, so young people that are involved in criminal activity, particularly around supply of Class A drugs. We're working with neighbourhood police to try and again get a foot in the door within local communities, particularly travelling communities, in relation to activity around criminal activity. Drug supply is the mainstay of the criminality that we are looking at, but also money laundering and fraud, in terms of young people being asked to hold huge amounts of money or to open bank accounts for local organised crime groups. Once a child has opened this bank account, it seems to be about £1,500. 1,000 will be taken back, 500 will be left, but the child will be told that they've committed a criminal offence, and then it becomes, as we've talked about previously, debt bondage, and a child is committed. In relation to the coercion, as we've talked about previously, the introduction to criminal activity is not dissimilar to the introduction of sexual exploitation, and sexual violence goes hand in hand with all forms of this exploitation. Number of missing episodes. We've talked a little bit about out of area children. For our looked after population, they seem fairly static. They've started to lower in relation to children that live at home, and I would suggest that the impact of out of area children still places the greatest demand, not necessarily on local authority employees, but on Leicestershire Police. If there is a request for our team to complete a return interview, we will do that in specialist circumstances, and we host strategy meetings from the hub for other local authorities so they can share information in relation to a risk that a child may be at, or if they're open to a current police investigation. We are striving to improve our return interviews. The listening support service continue to provide that service. We've now developed an improved quality assurance piece of work that we're completing to dip sample those and look for good practice or areas of concern. The so what question: are the return interviews making a difference? Are they reducing episodes? And are children receiving additional service from what they tell us during the missing episodes? Why have you gone? Where have you been? What's the risk, and how we can mediate that? In relation to developments, we continue to embed CSE champions across the workforce. I'm happy to say, I was going to say delighted, but I've said happy to be to be in relation to point 24. I am the service manager that now sits within our first response service, which offers an opportunity at the first encounter with children's services that we are screening for any identification or vulnerabilities to CSE or CCE. Now, that's not to determine that the hub continues to provide a specialist safeguarding service, but there is an expectation across County Council that all our staff understand the risk of exploitation. So we continue to roll out that message and provide checklists and information to assist them in identifying this. We've also just developed a County Council framework to tackle CCE, which has a pathway guidance and explains the governance and what we're trying to do and to develop, and that will sit within a regional context. We've been very intrinsic to looking at the regional standards recently that now adopt CCE as a major category, and that will be launched in November from Leicestershire County Council. I've mentioned the first step report that was completed by the Home Office and the Children's Society. We were one of 5 local authorities chosen in relation to our response of being part of a multi-agency hub and offering a joint service through police, youth service and ourselves. Criminal exploitation is now a priority. As I say at the majority of the meetings I attend, please do not forget child sexual exploitation. We are looking at all forms of exploitation of children currently, particularly in relation to cuckooing. Many of you are aware of Operation Lionheart, which was a police operation that took place within the Charnwood area. There will be a further police investigation at this sort of level in October, and I think the dates for that will be announced at the operations group on Friday that Sharon will be chairing. In relation to that operation, we were nominated in terms of offering safeguarding coordination, so the identification of the home addresses and premises that the police were going to enforce. The information was passed to me 24 hours in advance. It wasn't always, sometimes it was 15 minutes. And that was in relation to us identifying any safeguarding needs for children within those households. The outcome for children and vulnerable adults for us in the county, 15 children and 15 vulnerable adults were identified in relation to Operation Lionheart. We are working with adult services, particularly in relation to cuckooing and young people attending properties that house vulnerable adults and using them really as party houses that we've talked about previously in relation to gathering places for recruitment for children and young people. I think what I'd like to say, almost from a national, regional and a local perspective, looking at children that have been criminally exploited, we are very committed to look at the child first and offender second. So I think it's very, very important, particularly with our challenge conversations that we do have with police in terms of whether a child has committed an offence or whether they are a victim. That piece of work is starting to evolve, and we have been joined by the modern slavery team within the hub, and I think that's somewhat of an acknowledgement, particularly as the Modern Slavery Act Section 45 looks at the exploitation and the grooming of children into criminal exploitation, and I think once these test cases start to be heard in court, we will see something else evolve. Our work alongside our colleagues in the youth offending teams has strengthened our approach. So, and I think that's really, really important, particularly as we develop. We have been successful in relation to a bid to the Office of Crime Police Commissioner, and that's in relation to youth workers to work specifically with young people identified at risk of CCE. So that's extremely important, and we're just awaiting the result of the Youth Endowment Fund that appears to be going on quite nicely in relation to whether we are successful.
Thank you very much. Mr. Welsh, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just 2 areas, Donna. The CSE champions, what sort of number and what sort of benefits do you see from that?
We have CSE champions embedded in all the fieldwork teams. So they attend with my senior practitioner a quarterly training event. And we also send out a newsletter. I've brought a newsletter for you today that's our partnership newsletter for you to see. And that contains research, any resources, any new videos that we feel are appropriate to use with children and young people around looking and raising the awareness around CSE and CCE.
Second question is, you talked about the multi-agency team having sort of a wider brief, and in here you talk about modern slavery, trafficking and everything. Is there a risk that in all of that there's a chance that CSE gets lost?
I think that's a really appropriate question. I think as we started to roll out the training and the presentation about criminal exploitation, we did see a number of the sexual exploitation referrals start to drop. And then we also saw joint referrals for criminal exploitation and sexual exploitation. As I've said, criminal exploitation, sexual exploitation goes hand in hand, particularly in terms of recruitment. We've talked about children, particularly the children that have been involved in Operation Lionheart were extremely vulnerable and almost described themselves as a band of brothers. And that was about them having a purpose and something to belong to. That's much more powerful than anything else that we can offer. So in relation to what we try to offer, we are trying to offer a trusted relationship, a trusted professional relationship with a child, so they have somewhere to go and somebody to tell.
Thank you. Mr. Parton.
I'm looking at points 10 and 11, Donna. I'm looking at the percentage of male to female, and the sentence in particular about whilst most referrals are for females, the long-term balance varies across the sub-region, with many more males referred in Leicestershire. I was getting slightly confused with that. Are we saying that there are more males identified, but how come most referrals are for females? Is it because these gangs obviously want females because they can use them sexually as well as for criminal purposes?
I think in relation to the awareness campaign of Breck's Last Game, which I'm sure you've all seen it, targets, it's an audience of boys and young men. And that was in response to Kaylee's love story, young people telling us they felt that was mostly fit for girls. We've received more male referrals, and were doing before we started to make a public-facing campaign. But in relation to CCE, the majority of referrals have come from our youth offending service, and they have been boys. But the majority of referrals are young females. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And the second question is, given that Operation Lionheart has been running for several months now, and very aggressively so, what new information do we know? What new research has come to light that maybe perhaps we didn't know a month before Lionheart? What thinking has changed? Thinking as a result of all the people we've interviewed, arrested and prosecuted, what have we now altered as a result of what we now know, but we didn't know then?
Okay, from a national perspective, there is now a National County Lines Coordination Centre who I attend their meetings, and I think the majority of local authorities nationally are in a similar position to ourselves. It's the same as CSE, it's lifting the stone and you will find criminal exploitation. In relation to Lionheart, we have continued to hold multi-agency partnership meetings in relation to families and children that have been affected by that enforcement. I think that we haven't had a debrief or a review with Leicestershire Police. That needs to happen. We have lots of vulnerable adults that potentially could receive a custodial sentence of 12 plus years for intent to supply Class A drugs. I would suggest that they are equally victims of exploitation, the same as the children and young people. So we are trying to look at a public health model in relation to the violence reduction unit that's being developed in Leicestershire, and that's about looking for earlier opportunities for intervention and awareness raising, particularly around to stop the interest, the exploitation of vulnerable children and families, and the isolation of families that are involved in criminal activity.
Thank you very much. Did you want to come back, Mrs. Taylor? I'll emphasise on that before I go on to another people waiting to put their point.
Obviously, with my other hat on, I'm chair of the CSP for Charnwood, and the information we're getting back is that modern slavery is a lot more happening within that cohort of Operation Lionheart than we first thought, and that gives the prosecution, the CPS, a lot more emphasis to give longer sentences, but also control those people when they do come out of prison. So I think that's something that I've picked up so far, that modern slavery is the way that we can get these prosecutions to be longer jail sentences.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Page.
Thank you. Just like the other reports, I have to congratulate you on this report, but I also have to congratulate you on the commitment which is demonstrated within the report. It is really laudable, because we all know we don't want to see crime, and it is happening and we can't make it go away. And I think as parents and whatever, it really affects you when you're thinking, you know, all of these things which are happening. But I'm really pleased to see your section on developments. I think that is also a really fantastic way forward. Now, my comments are rather minor, but so one of the things is in relation to page 67, warning zone. Now, warning zone has been, in my opinion, when I was doing CSP, etc., a fantastic tool to get to the children. However, schools do not want to pay. And I think that is a really real shame, because I think they're missing a trick, and it is a great prevention. Now, my local CSP, and it's a long time ago, when I was chair, we set aside some money to ensure, you know, schools visiting. But again, that is being sort of, it's gone by the by. And whilst you were talking about working with partnership and the police and crime commissioner committing himself to a social worker and to an agenda, I think that is something, in my opinion, that's worth raising, that should be one of his priorities, to do that. So that's just a comment. I also, on another comment, is on Operation Lionheart. It tends to be very much set to Charnwood area and local, and there's a great big focus on that. And like Debbie just said, you know, they have learned lessons from that. But I think it needs to be shared through the major system. And I think, for instance, well, Harborough, never heard of it. Nobody ever heard of Lionheart. And you know, so I think we need to make sure that our local CSPs feed these things through, right through the grassroots, because that is also another form of prevention. And I think you were mentioning, and that just sprung up recently, you mentioned your newsletter. I wonder if that can be arranged to be sent out via CMIS on a regular basis, so it can be distributed via councillors to parish councils, or maybe even goes to the community CSP chairs to go out. And I think, you know, good luck with all of your work, and, you know, I think I really admire you for what you're doing.
Thank you for your comments. In relation to warning zone, Police Crime Commissioner has committed a budget to warning zone, so I'm extremely pleased about that. And we also, over the summer period when the children weren't attending, I went in with the police and we've weaved in key messages through all the zones around signs of exploitation and emotional well-being of children. And that's the first step really as we develop this new targeted zone, which is based on a child's journey really through all the universal services, but particularly social care and the police. In relation to spreading the word, I think you're quite right in relation to neighbourhoods, local communities, neighbourhood policing, and we do offer that. We're also starting to invest, for my shame, in video footage in terms of what we do, just simply because we haven't got the staff to go out into the communities that we had originally. You're right to say about Lionheart. The Lionheart operation started actually in New Parks and in the city. It didn't have as much impact within New Parks and the city, but the enforcement started from there and developed into Charnwood, as you said. Really happy to send out the CSE bulletin to as many people as possible, and we can organise that straight away. In relation to Market Harborough, one of our first CSE operations was in Market Harborough, and that was Operation Quartz, where one single perpetrator received a considerable sentence. However, the crimes against children were sexual crimes. He went to prison for drug offences in terms of intent to supply. I think that's been quite interesting, as you said, going around to different communities, speaking at GP forums when GPs have said, I wasn't aware of this. But then we do get referrals from GPs saying a young person has arrived, particularly with unusual injuries or mental health issues or suicidal tendencies. There is a strong link to being exploited.
Mr. Ord, did you want to come back on that point before I move to the other people?
It's really to reassure Mrs. Page in what she had to say. The Safer Community Strategy Board that I chair has had presentations on Operation Lionheart and the County Lines provision. It was so confidential that all the paperwork had to be handed back in at the end of the meeting, but the chairs of the community safety partnerships were present, and therefore they would be feeding out within the district or borough council the information that they've gained from there. You might have noticed that Hinckley is missing from this list, and I thought initially that was a mistake, an error, but it wasn't. They've been so effective in the Hinckley area that all the county lines had been closed down. Now there'll be a vacuum and somebody will try and come back and exploit them again, but the police were really successful, but even as chair of the board I wasn't aware of that.
Thank you. Mrs. Seaton.
Thank you, Chair. My question or inquiry really is, as you were saying, the spreading the word, and we hopefully we all know about Warning Zone and what they do, but it's only targeting primary school children, and I know with the early years we've said target them, but we're missing probably the older children that are more vulnerable. So has it fed at all into schools, into citizenship or anything like that? Is there a lesson that you've devised that can send out to schools for them to follow? So that's my inquiry.
Warning Zone do operate their on the move van that goes out to older children, so they target 10 to 14-year-olds. So in relation to what we're talking about around exploitation, that message is going out through Warning Zone. We're also going out to higher education and further education and talking to safeguarding leads, providing a presentation. We've also provided to the regional CSE leads through County Council a suite of slides which there are about 40 slides, and they depict lots of different aspects of exploitation. But there is a piece to add your own local data and information to make it very, very real for professionals and for local councillors.
Thank you. Mrs. Wright.
Thank you. In relation to paragraph 9, I appreciate there are many ways to measure success in terms of CSE. It indicates in there that there was a total of 181 perpetrators identified. Do we keep numbers of the criminal prosecutions and the success rates of those prosecutions? That's my first question.
Yes, we do have that information. I think when we first started our journey, it was very much around how many cases that we could get ready and get court ready to go through the judicial process. The key message now for the partnership is the safeguarding of children first and foremost. So it's very, very difficult to support a young person through the process from disclosure and then their journey to prepare for a judicial process and then surviving that. We like to regard our children in terms of achievement. We've been, and I have to shout this from the rooftops because we don't say this enough. Leicestershire County Council have been successful in terms of criminal compensation for 18 young people. The difference that's made to those 18 young people in terms of their lifelong chances going into further education and moving on, or it becomes a perpetual cycle of moving into difficult relationships, perhaps domestic abuse relationships or further exploitation. So I think it's really important, but we do hold that information alongside Leicestershire Police, we just don't publish it.
Okay, is that something that we could get hold of? Because I obviously understand the point about putting the children first, but actually getting hold of the perpetrators and taking them off the street, it seems to be a bit chicken and egg to me. So that would be my first point. My second, in terms of paragraph 15, it talks about the missing children status. And you've indicated there that there's been an increase of 40%, and you go on to say, this can partly be attributed to developments within the partnership reporting, continues to raise awareness around reporting missing children. What's the other part, would be my question.
We've had improvements to our electronic system in relation to Mosaic. We now have more features to identify missing episodes, and particularly if there is an allocated social worker, we do hold 3 in 90 missing strategies. So if the child is missing 3 times within 90 days, that triggers a multi-agency strategy meeting to discuss what's happening for that child. So that's the development. I think when I look across the data across the year, I would again say our biggest cohort are out-of-area children. In terms of children missing once, that's proportionately started to lower, as have children missing from home. But the majority of our young people that we've looked at across the year have been missing from home, not our children missing from care.
Okay. I'm going to take Dr. Einan, and then if it's a very quick one, I'll come to you, but then we still have a number of reports that, and I am aware of, I don't want to stop anybody, but we are closer to 4 o'clock than 3:30. And I know people do have other commitments this evening. So, Dr. Einan.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I've been following this story, I think, since about 2014, because I can remember when we still saw children who were going missing and getting involved with criminality as somehow making choices. And I'm very pleased to see the effort that has gone in to turning that around, because it's actually our thinking that we've had to turn around. The children haven't changed and the criminals haven't changed, but we have as the authorities. And that's my question really, is that despite Lionheart in my own patch over the last few days, and it made it into at least social media, there's been huge problems in Colville with what some of my colleagues are describing as feral children, as if it is the children who are the problem. These, that when a child of, who is a sort of 11, is breaking into a pharmacy, that is not likely to be something that they are doing just out of their own volition. So I'm still not convinced that us adults, in the wider sense, have actually got the message that when children are acting in this way, there must be something else and there must be an adult behind it. So I'm really kind of curious. I don't think we've had anything at my district council about this for us as district councillors, and I think we possibly still need some more education to come down, and I'm not sure we can necessarily trust the JAGs or say partnership boards to get that message into our thick skulls. Thank you.
We do have a representative that attends the JAGS and the Community Safety Partnership in Colville. We're supporting several young people. I think you're exactly right, the point that you raise. It's about adults and professionals changing their attitudes, and it isn't dissimilar to words like provocative and promiscuous that were used about young people that were involved in sexual exploitation. Young people don't have a choice. This is coercion into criminal activity. We need to look at the child first and the offender second.
Ever so quick, thank you, Chairman.
Quick, won't
yes,
you? Thank you.
You referred to G&T provisions and things eminent. So we've got the multi-agency traveller unit. Do we work with them? How do you approach and go into all of the encampment and sites and to ensure that all of this is also addressed in that way?
That's been really, really difficult. So we use particular neighbourhood police officers that have a link in and health professionals to raise the profile. We have tried to get CSE social workers in, but people are very suspicious of what we're talking about and believe that we are suggesting that their young people are sexually active or sexually motivated. So we are trying a different approach around social media and being safe online.
Do we use our MACHU, the county council multi-agency?
Yes, yes.
Right, well, I think we've given a very open and thorough discussion of this paper, and we thank you very much. And I think the consensus of the committee is that it's very good. We welcome it, and it was the 6 monthly report, so we look forward to hearing you again in another 6 to 7 months. Thank you very much, Donna. Thank you. We now move on to agenda item 12, which is the annual report of the Independent Reviewing Officer, and invite Kel de Clare, the Service Manager, to join us at the table. Thank you.
Hello, here to present the annual report of the IRO service for 2018-19 as is required by the IRO handbook, and it will also then be presented to our corporate parenting board in October as required. This annual report gives an overview of the performance and engagement of the IRO service as a whole for both our looked after children and our children subject to child protection plans, and it sets out our priorities for the forthcoming year as well. So within Leicestershire, our IROs have responsibility for both looked after children and children subject to child protection plans. So there's no disparity of the work itself. They both hold both sets of work, and the report covers both of those areas. In addition to that, we have IROs that also undertake the harmful sexual behaviour meetings and the subsequent reviews that are ongoing until safety is achieved for that child. This report highlights the broad areas overseen by the IROs, and I think it really highlights the oversight that they have in terms of their quality assurance role in such a diverse number of areas, and the importance of this quality assurance role in ensuring that the development and improvement of our intervention, and therefore the outcomes and impact for our children and families. So in terms of the broad overview, that's in terms the IRO report is for that. An overview of the report itself in terms of strengths. We continue to have good timeliness in terms of the reviews of arrangements, and that remains high, in addition to the timeliness of review child protection conferences and initial child protection conferences. So timeliness that the safeguarding unit have control over. We have a really good maintained position in terms of the performance within this area. And we have robust oversight in terms of ensuring there's service manager conversations with locality service managers should anything need to go out of timescale. Our repeat planning, which is an area over the last 2 years we've worked really hard on lowering, and we've maintained a really good position within our repeat plans, and we continue to be at 15.2%. Well, we were in 2018-19 at 15.2%, which is significantly lower than our statistical neighbours and the England average. And that has been down to considerable work within localities in terms of robust oversight of plans when ending cases, and in addition to that, ensuring secure family networks and safety for children when plans have been ended, and we're seeing success within that area. Use of multiple categories, although in 2018-19 we saw a slight rise, this has maintained at a good level, and we continue to audit that work in ensuring that multiple categories are used appropriately and that we don't lose any area of risk by not focusing solely on the correct area. One of the main areas that I think we've made significant progress on and continue to do so is our response to harmful sexual behaviour and the development of the reviewing process for that. This has been really supported by the fact that we now have 4 IROs that are trained in the AIMS 2 approach and now chair those meetings. And we've developed the meetings to follow the same process as the conference, the child protection conferences. So previously we would have 1 meeting. Now we ensure that we have reviews every 6 months until we've got an established safety plan for that young person. So we're not ending any oversight of that case until we're ensured that that child is safe. We also have had 2 additional IRO posts that were created within the review in early 2018, and these have been successfully recruited towards the end of 2018 with some really good and experienced workers, and we're seeing that establishment increase, really supporting our work and the capacity within the IRO service. And when I talked about the quality assurance role, it gives the ability for us to really develop our quality assurance role as well going forward. I think there's been a good and maintained position of the IRO, myself as service manager and our managers doing continuous auditing processes within our work to ensure that we understand themes and anything that's coming through, we ensure that we audit repeat plans and cases that are subject to a plan over 18 months. And then we will share that findings both with SMT and with our wider service managers to ensure that that learning is understood and we're understanding what we're presented with. In terms of our challenges and what we're worried about, the performance of participation in our review of arrangements, taking into account the growth of our children in care. We've got development work to do to ensure that we are diversifying in how we're gathering views of our children. And I think we need to think much broader in terms of using technology and the ways our children like to engage, far more than just a face-to-face conversation, so that we're taking into account their needs. In addition to that, we have done a lot of work for those children that want to participate, how they can actually take more ownership of their meetings and developing ways in which they can chair their own meeting. We've had a PowerPoint of a meeting with a young person actually creating his own PowerPoint because he wanted to take charge of his own meeting. So really trying to let our children take ownership of that. And actually it's a development piece of work that we've got within the Corporate Parenting Board. And we're going to have a task and finish group as well, which will be both with our young people, our participation officers and some IROs to really try and push that forward. there continues to be a level of concern in timeliness of reports to LAC reviews. We have seen a really concerted effort by our locality teams and the social workers, and we've seen a real improvement with getting the reports, even at times of real challenge for them. So the IROs take their responsibility of supporting and challenging back when we haven't got that, but ensuring that's done as a peer-to-peer kind of position, and understanding that there may be additional challenges, but having an expectation and ensuring that managers are aware when that's not happening. So another area which we feel as a service we need to continue to develop is our quality assurance alerts that we will send at points of concern. And there's a process that is identified and followed within that. We have not seen as many quality assurance alerts as we feel may have been necessary. And for us, there is work to be done. Primarily, my view is getting it onto our Mosaic system so that there's a better tracking position, so that managers, when they're requested, it's on there's an actual tracking alert, rather than it being emails and us holding a tracker ourselves within the unit. So there's development within that area that we need to take responsibility for and have really clear expectations of the IROs as to when they will send a QA. And also myself, I'm attending service manager meetings to ensure that other managers understand the purpose and need for those quality assurance alerts, because the purpose of it is to ensure children are receiving the right service and the best service that we can possibly give to them. In terms of challenges on behalf of children, it is robust, and particularly robust for our looked after children. And there is a concerted effort and evidence of good tracking of IROs on the Mosaic system for that. This needs now to ensure that it's replicated with our child protection cases, particularly those that have been subject to plans for more than 9 months, to ensure drift and delay is captured and identified a lot sooner than getting to the next review child protection conference. So in terms of what needs to happen, I've talked briefly about participation with our young people, and we want to develop a real broad range of methods, including tools to support participation in reviews. We have participation within our child protection conferences, which is supported robustly by our children's rights officers in terms of the advocacy service that we have. We are also relaunching a views workbook for our young people to ensure that one of the varieties of ways in which we can capture voice. I've also talked about the quality assurance alert process, and we want to ensure that that can become a Mosaic process that gives us better understanding and tracking. And we also need to ensure recording and distribution of records is a priority, and that we maintain a good standard and statutory responsibility to complete that.
Mr. Welsh.
Thanks for the report. I think over the last few years the IRO service has clearly gone from strength to strength, and I think it's had a key part to play in the improvements that we've seen within children and family services. I just wanted to comment on one thing in the report. It was great to hear how children's voice came through in the report, in strength and in meaning. That was really welcome, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else? No? Well, I'd just like to thank you very much again. Very positive and very useful report for us all. Thank you very much. Certainly.
I'm sorry, I'd just like to make a comment about the last paper, if I could, just a quick comment. Because, sorry, sit down. I was just looking at the last paragraph on page 85, and we're so used to doom and gloom here on how bad it looks for Leicestershire, and I couldn't quite believe what I was reading on the last line of that, when it says Leicestershire continues to have one of the lower levels of children in care nationally. And although the figures are shocking and terrible, we're obviously doing something good. It's not all doom and gloom, because although they are bad, because I wouldn't like any child in care, but that's statistically not going to happen ever. But I would just like to thank everybody that's involved in this. And looking into all of these different reports that we've had, all based around children in care, it just shows you what importance Leicestershire County Council puts on that. And I want to thank everybody that's involved. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We now move to agenda item 13, which is on page 117. And is Paula Sumner coming to join us? No, right. Jane and Stuart? Yes. Thank you very much and welcome.
Thank you, Chair. The report you've got in front of you gives you an overview of the department's performance for the period April to June, so Q1 of this year. You'll see that from the 42 measures that we've reported on, 12 have improved, 11 show no significant change, and 9 have declined. I don't intend to go through the entirety of the report, but just to pull out a few key areas. You'll note in paragraph 10 that we are improving our performance around the timeliness of single assessments completed within 45 days. There's a significant improvement from the last quarter, where we were at 60.3%, and we are now sitting at 71.8%, and that number continues to improve month on month. The percentage of children with 3 or more placements during the year continues to remain positive, and that's currently at 8%. We're particularly proud of our performance around care leavers in suitable accommodation, which remains stable and high at 93%, and those in education, training, employment, again remains at higher levels than statistical neighbours at 59.6%. In terms of families being able to be sufficient and able to cope, we've detailed there some information around our early help numbers. You'll recall that we did undertake a review or change in our service. The change in numbers doesn't represent a lower number of people worked with. It represents a change in the way in which we are recording those with whom we work, and we are currently looking at that as we go forward. But our progress towards our payment by results target remains good, and we currently are sitting at 68% of that target. You'll note in paragraphs 23 and 24 our performance around youth offending. Whilst the number of our first-time entrants continues to decrease, you'll note that our rate of reoffending by young people has increased over the last year. That is in relation to a very small group of young people who have committed a significant number of offences. In terms of special educational needs and disabilities, again, we've detailed for you there our most up-to-date data around our numbers of children with education, health and care plans. And not only will you note a significant increase in the number of children who now have an education, health and care plan, you'll note that there was an even more significant increase in those requests for initial assessments, but also a reduction in those requests for assessments that were refused. And again, an increase significantly in EHCPs that were issued in 2018. So there was a 63.7% increase in the number of plans issued compared to the previous year, which is significantly greater. We've detailed for you the outcomes data around for schools. We've got our provisional 2019 data in. It hasn't been validated yet, and we're unable to make the national comparisons we would want to, and we'll be able to provide that at a later date. But you can see across all key stages outcomes are improving for our children across Leicestershire, and particularly around our good level of development at foundation stage, as we've already highlighted. So I don't think I'll pick anything else up, Chair, from the report, but any questions? Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Stuart, would you like to add anything to?
Thank you. Only to say the education data we know to be very accurate, but it's just not validated yet. So the DFE will now look at a small number of cases like duplicates or omissions or appeals, which on a national level doesn't make a huge difference, but it just isn't validated yet. But we're quite confident that this will reflect the final picture.
Thank you very much. Any comments other than Mr. Welsh?
I suppose it's only right as an opposition member to admit that this performance is very, very settled and very good. And it's nice, you know, we've seen transition of directors, but the stability continues. We're seeing that, and it's almost to be expected. And I can assure members here that are newer serving than me, that was not the case when I joined this committee, when at times there were some real serious performance concerns. So it's really nice to see this sort of consistency and this embedded performance. So thank you very much.
Mrs. Clark. Oh yes, Mrs. Lewis.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for this report, which is really good to read. I can only talk about Church of England data because that's the data that I have access to. Key Stage 2 Church of England data suggests that 74% in our single academy trusts is the reading, writing, maths attainment Key Stage 2 figure, yet 64% achieve reading, writing, maths in our maintained schools. And I think my question for the officers is around what can we do better to release the expertise and the capacity that's being demonstrated in our single academy trusts to support the maintained sector more effectively. I've got a second question, Chair, as well. Would you like me to give that? Yeah. My second question is around the plan for sustaining effective provision. We know that outstanding providers are not are exempt from routine inspection. However, of the 10% that are nationally re-inspected, there's a significant proportion that's dropping to requiring improvement, and some of those have happened in Leicestershire. We're hearing that we're going to get back a routine outstanding inspection, and with the changes to the inspection framework, it would just be really interesting to just hear a very quick high-level reflection from officers about what's the plan for sustaining effective provision. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If I just pick up the first one, it's really good to hear the outcomes for the Church of England schools in terms of the single academy trust. So well done. I'm really pleased. I think the point you're raising is really important, and I guess what we would want to do is understand why that difference is there. Is it that it's maintained schools, or are there other things? One of the strengths within the Leicestershire system is the sharing of expertise around school improvement more broadly. And I guess the challenge for all of us is ensuring that expertise in school improvement is targeted effectively. So you'll be aware, and members will be aware, the capacity within the department for school improvement is no longer there. However, we do have a significant role in facilitating that. So I think the kind of push to use expertise within our single academy trusts and multi-academy trusts for the benefit of all Leicestershire learners is absolutely the right way to go, and we would want to be part supporting that. In terms of sustaining effective provision, a couple of things. Obviously the announcement around the changes to the inspection framework will be welcomed in terms of schools being targeted more frequently for inspection. I think the skill of the partnership together will be in identifying schools who are vulnerable, regardless of whether they're an outstanding school or a requires improvement school. And I think that goes back to my previous answer around how we use the expertise within the system. So in terms of the local authority's role in that, you know that we've developed a team of education effectiveness partners, and those partners are partners with all schools, regardless of whether we're an academy or maintained school. So I'm optimistic that the new inspection framework will allow those schools to be successful, but certainly we can target those schools that need targeting more effectively as well.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. Thank you very meeting. It's been very positive, but it's also been very, very informative. Just to remind you that our next meeting is on the 5th of November, so expect fireworks, sparklers and everything else. Not too many rockets, I hope, at 2 o'clock. Thank you very much and safe journey home. Thank you.